Mark, I want to go to you first on this. Elizabeth Edwards has just died. She's been in terrible health now for months and years, in fact, caught up in the middle of this triangle, this embarrassment for her husband, a hurt to her. We don't see much of this in politics where you have really a horrible disease striking somebody so popular and as attractive as this. At the same time, she is on the wrong end of a scandal, and it's had nothing to do with her.
Well, she's really one of the most public and valiant cancer survivors this country has ever seen. She worked so hard with her children to keep her life together and under a very difficult situation. And I think it's important to remember her in part for what she did with that spotlight. She didn't let herself become a victim. She worked hard for single-payer health care, for homosexual rights, and other issues she cared a lot about. Even as she was struggling towards the end, she's still worried about her family and her country, and I think that's an incredible testament to someone so strong who dealt with so much adversity.
Chuck, this story blew up right in the middle of a presidential campaign. John Edwards tried twice. He almost made it the first time, less of a chance the second time. In the midst of this triangle, you have to call it. It's nothing new in life. There was infidelity involved, and then there was this terrible disease.
It was such a surreal issue, frankly, in American politics. There was nothing like it, that you had such a tragic personal story on having to do with cancer on a spouse, a candidate's spouse who was so active and so engaging and engaged with both the media, with her candidate, and many people believe she was the backbone, that, you know, John Edwards never would have gotten half of what he got without her pushing him as a Senate candidate, pushing him as a presidential candidate, as a vice presidential candidate. The whole thing, the way it played out in public, I'm sure is something that a lot of loved ones of the entire Edwards family wish wasn't so public. And I think that is such a complicated legacy that both of them leave.
Well, we're saying right now, NBC's reporting right now, confirming rather the news that Elizabeth Edwards has died just late this afternoon, just about a few moments ago. It's been reported. Mark, it seems to me one of these issues about how we decide who our president should be. We have this attractive young trial lawyer known for winning big cases against big hospitals and important doctors. And yet he seemed like a cute guy, a guy who may not be that well-read, for example, not that deep, if you will, on issues. And yet he had this, what seemed to be this anchor of a wife, a very solid person who seemed to be in love with him clearly. And yet here was this person who seemed weightier than he in terms of her background, her education, her knowledge, in fact, her seriousness. And yet it turned out that there was infidelity mixed right into this. And she apparently got knowledge of that ahead of the rest of us.
Well, Chris, look, you know, John Hallman and I, when we were reporting and writing Game Change, had so many interesting characters to write about and to report on. And John and I have had the same experience, which is there are no two characters in the book, a book that includes Sarah Palin and Barack Obama and Bill and Hillary Clinton. There are no two characters that had more resonance, as we've talked to people about the book, than John and Elizabeth Edwards. The story of how he almost became vice president, how he ran for president twice, and how she was a force behind the scenes and a very tough person is really an extraordinary caution for a lot of people to say, we see these people put themselves forward for public life. We think we see them and get the sense to know them through their interviews with Oprah Winfrey and news contexts. And yet the story of John and Elizabeth Edwards and what actually was going on with them was one that was not revealed when he was putting himself forward and almost was vice president twice.
Rial Hunter is, of course, the third part of this triangle. John had an affair with her. It's well known. It's publicized. There's nothing interesting about that except that, Chuck, here we are looking back. Not that this is an ancient history here. This is the last couple of elections where we had a man like this. Like you and like Mark, I was in those magical rooms in Iowa and states like that where this young guy, this attractive young lawyer, as I said, was able to mesmerize a room of 200 or 300 people, what we call the small room. He was the great man of the small room. He came so close with all these problems buried in his background.
You know, what's interesting is I feel like we do know Elizabeth Edwards. I feel like she's a real person. We did get to know her. We understand her character, understand her motivations, understand her beliefs. I don't think, I can't, I'm not going to speak for other people. I can't say the same thing about John Edwards. That is he is still an enigma to me. I don't think any of us know, was he performing an act? Was he acting? When wasn't he acting? When was he genuine?
Chuck, I confirm I'm dittoing everything you've said when I'd interview him. Excuse me for interrupting, but you just strike me as absolutely true. I'd interview him and I'd look into his eyes and I'd say to myself, I can't see anything there. I don't know what this is I'm hearing from this guy.
But
Who
not
is he?
with her.
Yeah.
That's what was so amazing. Frankly, she should have been the candidate.
Yeah, well, there's an American story.
She had the passion. She had the principles. She had the belief. She had the spine. She had the ambition, frankly. And I think, there's probably, maybe some people would argue too much ambition at times or push John Edwards too much. But she had all of the attributes of a successful politician.
Yeah.
He was... I guess he was acting. I don't know. Maybe someday we will get to know John Edwards. I don't think we know him.
Let me bring in Kelly O'Donnell. Kelly, thanks for joining us. You've covered Elizabeth Edwards, who's just passed away. We're just reporting that right now here live. And, the funny thing is I kid around with people, as you know, even with you, Kelly, sometimes. And I once kidded around with Elizabeth Edwards. I said, are you Catholic? You seem Catholic to me. You look Catholic. And she kidded me. Said, well, I was raised Italian. Maybe that's it. You got this notion of my face. But she had this big, wide face, nothing to hide, it seems. Your thoughts as a person now that we've lost her?
Well, I've known her for years, and I was able to speak to family just a short time ago. And the scene that they described was at 10:15 this morning. She passed away with family around her. Her husband, John Edwards, they were not divorced. He had been there as well. The children, everyone had come together. And one of the things that I was told is that she was really hoping that after her death, people would not describe this as losing a battle with cancer. Friends say that Elizabeth viewed this as a battle to live a good life, and in that context, they believe that she won. She was trying to create memories and experiences for her, especially her young children, to fill the void that she knew would come when this cancer recurred. It first was diagnosed in 2004, right after the election. I remember being at Faneuil Hall when John Kerry conceded, John Edwards conceded. The next day, they were at Boston, Mass, getting this diagnosis. Then in 2007, amid the campaign, yet again, the recurrence was diagnosed. And more recently, after going through lots of different types of treatment, her doctor said that it was no longer possible to aggressively treat it. It had spread. And so she had been preparing, especially for her younger children. And if you remember, she had lost her firstborn, Wade, and they're asking that in lieu of any flowers or things like that, for people who are close to the Edwards family to donate to a foundation in his name, which puts computers in schools for less privileged children. So she has been trying to prepare for this, and the hard part is those I have talked to who are close to her say that she was perhaps more prepared than they are, especially as this news gets out now and the reality of it sets in. So as you and Chuck were talking about how she might have been the candidate, I always had that sense about her. Early in their life, it was Elizabeth who was the star of the couple. She was a terrific lawyer. She did not take her husband's name, Edwards, until the loss of their son at age 16 in a car accident. She really was her own person in her life before she became a national figure. She was a healthcare advocate, and for those who don't know her childhood background, she grew up in Japan and most recently took her family there to show her kids where she had grown up. She was an Air Force brat, and so she had that background of military in the family, great intellect, and we all saw how she went through some very public struggles, not only the loss of her son, but the destruction of her marriage, and the politics that is always tough, losing elections and so forth. So she was a very special person to cover. She was one of those candidate spouses who was always extra kind to those of us who are on the road with them, and that was certainly appreciated.
You seem like you liked her.
I did like her. I absolutely liked her. I found her to be warm and funny. I found her to be someone who understood when we chased after her trying to get information that we were doing our jobs. I had a sense that she really was passionate about the cause that they were running on back in the time before we knew all of the things that brought that to an end. But she was someone that I enjoyed covering, and certainly one thing you found about people who have gotten to know her is in this time of her very public battle with this disease, there were many people who were able to express expressed concern for her, and she was always very gracious about it, of how appreciative she was for people's interest in her and concern for her, and she was hoping that this would, of course, bring attention for women to also examine themselves and get the proper checkups and so forth on breast cancer. So she was really someone about a message, and she tried to do that right to the end.
It's so great being your colleague. You're such a human being about this stuff. Thank you, because this person is somebody I like too, and it's, you know, you click on certain people you cover and others you don't, and I think I'll stick with everybody else about her husband. I still find John Edwards a very hard guy to read, very cute, you know, the superficial's dynamite. Apparently he was great with juries, had a sharp mind.
But it's not about him today. It's not about him today.
Well, thank you for reminding me. That's true. It's true. Why did I go that direction? But I cover politics.